Hi, yes it is.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for rescheduling. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no worries at all.
Great. Well, I think you might know who I am. I'm Mindy Martell from the Apparel Mentor and Clothier Design Source.
Yes.
I don't think we've spoken before, have we?
I don't believe so. I talked with a representative before I signed up, but that was it.
Okay, great. So I guess why don't we start off by just maybe, telling a little bit about yourself and your product and then jumping right into your question.
Okay, great, yeah. I've always thought about doing something like starting a clothing brand, but just for a long time didn't really know where to start. And then at the beginning of this year, I decided to just go for it. And I've set up all the legal things that are necessary, but still just trying to figure out the most effective and best ways to bring my products to life and have them be made with affordability, but also not sacrificing quality to do so, all that type of stuff. So yeah, I've mostly just been going off of things I've been able to read off the internet and such like that.
Yeah.
A big goal of mine would be to find manufacturers in the United States, because right now I'm only working with overseas because that's the only ones I've found that are accessible for low MQOs and also affordability. Yeah, and then another thing that I do struggle with is tech packs.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are kind of the struggles I'm facing right now.
Okay. And what kind of apparel are you making? Just curious.
Just a large range of women's, but
Okay.
yeah, only women's, more young focused, trendy, unique stuff.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And have you ever developed any other kind of product, or is this your first kind of foray, even in a different industry?
I mean, nothing like apparel. I've done stickers a way long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've done apparel construction for a boutique.
Okay.
But adding on to stuff that was already made. Nothing
Got it.
creating clothing from a sketch into reality.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, you got a journey ahead of you.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Yeah, so let's see. So I would first attack it. Well, a couple things a couple words you mentioned that kind of stuck out to me, like when you said affordability, but not sacrificing the quality.
Yeah.
So if you're making low quantity, which, usually when you start out, that's kind of how it is.
Yeah.
If you're making low quantity, a lot of times affordability and low quantity kind of don't go hand in hand.
Right.
Because and it's really not because, not because anyone's trying to rip you off. It's because of the efficiencies that get built up in the manufacturing process when more is getting made. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for instance, if I'm making 100 garments in my factory versus 1,000, to cut it costs the same amount of money to cut the 1,000 versus 100 because I just put more layers on.
Right.
It's kind of the same thing in the sewing process. It's not as dramatic, but in the sewing process, the sewers get much, much faster, more efficient, and so it just costs less, right?
Right.
And you got to set up the line and you got to set up the machines, and there's kind of cost involved in that, and you get to spread that out over more units when it's a higher quantity. So So that's one challenge that every new entrepreneur faces. And so what I always recommend is getting pricing for your line or your clothing at a higher volume than you're gonna make, but just see what that pricing would be. And so you can be aware when you price out your garments, do you want to price kind of for the future, and test the market at, say you're going to sell your shirt for $100, at maybe $100 is like at a low quantity, but at a high quantity you could sell it for $50, right?
Right.
And so you want to be aware of that when you're pricing it and selling it to the consumer, because you don't want to like artificially price it too high.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah. So that's just like one thing to think about. And, eventually if you think you're going to be at higher quantities, you might want to price it a little bit more like that, which means you won't make that much money in the first run or two, right?
Right. Just setting up for the future.
Yeah. Because I think the problem is I've seen a lot of apparel lines fail because they're pricing their garments at 50 units and then they're pricing it to the client at that really low unit, and it becomes a really high price point. And so then they're not getting a good market read. Is the market liking my product at this price?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's one thing I would say. And then like manufacturing in the US, there are some options out there. The lower MOQ is, again, always a hurdle to get over, but there are definitely options out there. Have you talked to anyone from the US or not?
I've done research on like 15 to 20 in the US, and have like gotten a few quotes, but like I know a ton have like minimum spending like to do the factory work. So I haven't had like any serious talks with US manufacturers about starting.
Sure. So the thing that I have found that's pretty different about the US manufacturing world versus overseas is if you get all of your ducks in a row before you approach a manufacturer, they're much, much, much more likely to work with you, even at a lower MOQ. So like, and when I say ducks in a row, like, I don't know if you're aware of my book or the Apparel Mentor program, but there's a checklist that it's on the website as well. It's a free checklist. It's called the Manufacturing Checklist on the apparelmentor.com. But that checklist, it involves getting your patterns made, having a sample made, knowing what fabric you want, having a tech pack, which I know is one of your questions, and I'll jump into that.
Right.
But having that entire list done and then going to a manufacturer and saying, I have all these things done, and then they'd be much more likely to be like, oh, okay, we can make that at a lower MOQ because you're coming to us with all of this development work done. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I got the workbook and I've skimmed over it. I haven't completely finished it.
Yeah.
But one of the things I read that getting a tech pack made for an individual product could be anywhere between $500 and $1,000 range.
Yeah.
Which I definitely wasn't expecting to
Sure.
be paying per tech pack per product.
Sure.
And something I've seen with like the overseas manufacturers is that they've been a little bit more willing to work with like incomplete tech packs
Sure.
and making it work.
Yeah. Yep. And that's where it all comes down to. Labor is cheaper there, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, if I have to pay someone here $18 to $20 an hour, over there they might be $1 a week. I mean, it's a dramatic difference. So that's why you're going to find working overseas is that development work they're going to charge a lot less for, or be okay with like less of it being done, because then they'll just do it and it's cheap, right?
Right.
So that's part of what you're finding there. And do you have patterns made?
I have like kind of like skeletons of them, like.
Okay.
Still trying to figure out what those are needing to look like.
Sure. Yeah. So patterns and tech packs are, and cut me off if I'm describing something you already know, but patterns are very different things than tech packs. In fact, as a US manufacturer, I think patterns are much more valuable than tech packs. Because
Okay, yeah, I definitely didn't know that.
Yeah. So a pattern is the shapes of the garment that get cut out, and it's usually a digital file. It can be like a paper pattern as well. But you know, if you have a shirt, you're going to have the panel for the front, and the panel for the sleeve, and the panel for the other sleeve, and the panel for the back, and the panel for the collar. And that's what's going to be unique to your garment, is the actual pattern. Because that's where a lot of the expensive development work comes into play. Is, you know, if you come to me with an idea, I can't just go grab a scissors and start cutting the fabric. I need to actually have the shapes to cut out.
Right.
And that's what a pattern is. And so without a tech pack, I can still make your garment because there's something I can cut out, right?
Uh-huh.
But if I've got nothing to cut out, the tech pack doesn't help me much.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah. So in the US manufacturing realm, having patterns are really, really valuable. And not only that, if you're manufacturing overseas, somebody's making your patterns. Like if you've got samples, somebody's making your patterns, but because you're not probably paying for them, you don't own those patterns. So then they can use your patterns and share them with other brands.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that does.
So if you go and pay somebody to make your patterns, then you own those files, and those are exclusive to you and your brand.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of like the engineering work happens, is just what's the shape of this armhole, and what's the shape of this neckline, and what's the shape of this collar and this hood, and you know what, all the components, right? That's what's going to make your garment look different and unique, is the way, the shapes that get cut out. That's a big part of it. And then of course the fabric it's made out of.
And is that someone that you usually hire to do it for you? Is it something you can kind of figure out to do on your own, or what?
Yeah, so it's a really highly skilled individual who's been doing it for years. That's who's going to get the best pattern and best fit, because that's how you know, I haven't seen your garments, but for instance, I'm wearing like a shawl collar sweater right now. The way the collar rolls over looks really nice, and that's because like a really good pattern maker made it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
And so I wouldn't recommend doing it yourself unless you have some training in pattern making. And so it would generally be somebody that you hire. And if you do hire them, like I said, then you own those designs. If you get it done for free somewhere, you don't own them.
Okay, that makes sense. So kind of like the steps to get it prepared for production is both the pattern and the tech pack?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And you know, there's nothing wrong with going overseas and having them do it. I just am letting you know the risk reward. The part of why you're getting it so cheap is because the labor's cheap, but also because you aren't going to own them.
Right, that definitely makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So they're going to make that pattern and they're going to use it again for somebody else if they want to.
Right.
Yep. Which sometimes is worth it. Just depends, right? It depends on your business model and your, what you want to pay for things and all of that.
Okay, another question I have then is like, typically how much would one spend per design if they were doing this pattern maker and then a tech pack professional?
Yeah.
Like, typically how much would they spend maybe just to even get it prepared?
Yeah, so you would spend, if you're getting it done in the US, you're gonna be looking at like a couple $1,000 per style.
Okay.
And if you get it done overseas, it is going to be less. And there are some places overseas that will, do it the other way, where you pay them for their patterns and things like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely very insightful. Something I did not know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys are only like about, which you probably are, just like getting it constructed from scratch, or if you guys do anything like about wholesale, because I have looked into like a couple of wholesale apps like Fashion Go. I'm hoping to have a mix. Like I definitely do want my own designs as well, but I definitely know like the wholesale route is a lot cheaper.
Sure. Yep. So we don't do any wholesale stuff like that, but definitely like a hybrid mix of maybe have a couple unique products in your line that are exclusive, to your brand, and then mixing in some wholesale. I think that's a really good model. I've seen a lot of people do that.
Okay.
Definitely workable. And then you can have those like wow pieces that catch people's eye, that are super unique, that are unique to your brand.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was kind of just the main questions I had about like the setup. And then do you have any advice on finding like the best vendors for you in the US?
Yeah, so let's see, how do I sum that up really quickly? First of all, you want to get prepared. That's probably my best advice, because you're not going to get real good answers from them until you got all your ducks in a row. I want 3 styles. One's a dress, one's a hoodie, one's a pant. Here's what they're going to look like. I've got patterns made and I know what my fabrics are. And once you get all that ducks in a row, your response rate from these factories goes up like 100%. They start responding, and then you can start really vetting them. The other thing that is in my book that I wrote, and in the Apparel Mentor program that we teach, is know if you're making a knit or a woven and go to a factory that is doing the same. That's one of the big mistakes is people they spend all this time talking to a factory that doesn't have the right equipment or skills to make their product. So you want to find a factory that does something more in your category. And generally that comes generally that comes down to, first it comes down to, is it knit or woven?
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so you need to know the difference, and then you need to know, what your products are going to be, if they're going to be knit or woven. And then don't talk to a factory that makes wovens if you're making knits. Like, you're going to cut out a whole bunch of time right there.
Okay, and any advice on like picking the appropriate fabric per design or whatnot?
Yeah. Generally, knits are like stretchy and more casual, and wovens are usually not stretchy and more dressy or outerwear. if it goes a lot deeper than that, but like if I were to just super generalize, in our Apparel Mentor program, we actually have 3 whole chapters or topics on that exact question. So probably about an hour and a half of content on that exact question right there. So it's a little bit hard to like teach quickly in a phone call, but like in a nutshell, knits are like casual, stretchy, wovens are generally dressier or outerwear.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And really, if you have other inspiration garments where you're like, oh, I like this dress, I want to make a dress kind of like this, and if you just show that picture to, you know, one of our apparel mentors, we can tell you right quickly by looking at it, oh, that's a woven, that's a knit. Like, I mean, we know the difference very, very fast.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. But
okay,
yeah.
Well, I feel like those were kind of the main things I've had question marks around.
Yeah, those are great questions.
Yeah, and at the time I probably can't think of anything else, but if you have any other sort of advice or anything.
Sure. You know, I would just say I've been doing this since 2003, helping apparel entrepreneurs. I really, really highly recommend you get a mentor. It's really hard to navigate the industry on your own. You know, it seems like it's an easy industry to tackle, but it's actually really, really complex. But if you kind of do everything in the right order and then you have a mentor to help you when you get stuck, like then it goes so much smoother. But I think people that I've seen just like totally try to do it on their own, they either give up because they get stuck, or it takes like 2 to 3 years to get it done versus maybe like 6 to 12 months.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's definitely a really good advice. Would you recommend like finding a mentor like in the network you already have yourself, or like any strategies of like going out and finding one if you don't already have that connection?
Sure. Well, I mean, this is where I get to plug my program. We do have the Apparel Mentor program. Are you familiar with that?
I'm subscribed to one of the things.
Okay.
I didn't choose to do. I think I just did it like on my own pace because.
Oh, sure.
I wasn't sure if like the preset dates and weeks would work for me every single week.
Yeah.
So that's the only reason I decided to do the self-paced instead.
Got it. Okay.
So is that something I would need to upgrade to get like the mentorship? Like.
Yeah. So if you did want to upgrade, just shoot us an email. I think, you've been talking with Carrie at the Apparel Mentor.
Yes.
Yeah, then you'll have access to a mentor. You can message us anytime, and then also you get to meet with Carrie once a month and then me once a month as well. And so that does help you if you run into like, oh, okay, I'm getting a little stuck here. We always can come up with the next thing to do to get you unstuck. But beyond the Apparel Mentor, it's really just like finding, maybe networking, maybe LinkedIn, finding people in the industry. It's really just finding somebody who's been through apparel development like hundreds, if not thousands of times, because we see the same problems come up over and over and over. So it's pretty easy and quick for us to get you unstuck versus you trying to do it, on your own. Yeah.
Okay, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Lori. It was great talking to you, and appreciate all your questions. They were really good. And hopefully we'll see you in one of our Apparel Mentor sessions coming up. Otherwise, either way.
Thank you so much.
Really good. Best of luck to you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.